Welcome back, everybody. My name is Rich from Deep Groove Mono, and this is Record Collector Confessions. Today's topic is one that I've thought about doing for a long time. This was probably a good time to do it based on my habits as a collector lately. The topic is going to be Blue Note records. And Blue Note is, of course, a very important label to jazz record collectors. They're a very important label to the history of jazz in general. But I also find that Blue Note is a controversial label when it comes to record collecting. If I could make one sweeping statement as to why I think that is, I think it's mainly because they are so popular and that some collectors, especially newer collectors, often can get a little caught up in the label itself and they might limit themselves and they may obsess over Blue Note a little bit. You know, if you look at the different values and prices of jazz records, vintage jazz records in the hobby, the vast majority of the most valuable records are Blue Note records. There's a lot that are very rare on smaller labels, but Blue Notes are in very high demand pretty much at all times. I've always been a huge Blue Note fan. You know, ever since I started collecting many years ago. I got serious about collecting around 2012. It's been about 14 years. And right away I fell in love with Blue Note. When I first started getting into jazz, I really started listening in earnest, checking CDs out of my library around 2007. At that time I was really into Miles Davis, Thelonious Monk, John Coltrane, Max Roach, and I remember buying their records on Columbia, Atlantic, Riverside, these labels, right? And then around 2010, when I went on a road trip down south to Memphis and New Orleans to visit friends, I remember right before that somehow I ended up with a Blue Note cover art book, and I fell in love with the album covers, and I just for the very first time started listening to the music. At that time, YouTube really wasn't a big thing with going to listen to music on, and there was no Spotify. I don't remember even listening to the records on my road trip, just looking at the covers and thinking, oh, that cover looks cool, that cover looks cool, and like trying to pick out some records based on the covers at that time. So anyways, that's how I kind of got into Blue Note, and then in 2012 I got really big into Rudy Van Gelder's story and Blue Note's story, and I got more into listening, you know, and Spotify was a huge help at that time. I remember, I think it was Michael Kuskuna, rest in peace, who created this app on Spotify when they had apps, and you could like flip through the album art and listen to the albums that way. That was a huge tool for me to get familiar with the Blue Note catalog at the time. And yeah, the rest is history, I guess. You know, I'm a huge Blue Note record collector. I bought a really cool book about Blue Note written by Richard Cook. As a collector, I've always really focused mostly on the work of Rudy Van Gelder, whether he recorded the session and someone else mastered it, or he recorded the session and mastered it. His story is so inspiring. He has such a huge body of work as an engineer. And really, despite his shortcomings, he was extremely talented and gifted at what he did. By and far, when it comes to collecting vintage jazz records, I strongly prefer records mastered by Rudy in particular. He got more level on the LP than anybody else. So all the Blue Note stuff, almost all of it, like 99% of it, unless it was maybe recorded overseas, was recorded and mastered by Rudy from like 1953 until the late 60s when he stopped working for them. And also he recorded pretty much everything for Prestige and New Jazz in the late 50s and early 60s, and I'm a really big fan of that stuff too. However, Bob Weinstock, the owner of Prestige and New Jazz, he cut more corners than Alfred Lion and Francis Wolff at Blue Note. And what happens in the late 50s is you start to find that they are getting their records pressed on recycled vinyl, or at least that's what everybody believes, that it causes this kind of hissy noise on a lot of the records. And it's like a minefield buying Prestige and New Jazz from the late 50s on. It's very hit or miss. It's really hard to do online because you can't preview the record first. So, you know, as I've grown as a collector, I focus less and less on those labels. Riverside never really impressed me in terms of their mastering and their pressing. So the Blue Note stuff was always pressed great. It was always mastered great. Of course, the album art, I'm a huge album art person. And yeah, Reed Miles doing album art for Blue Note, I mean, you know, nothing can beat it. I mean, he was just such a brilliant, modern graphic designer. And I really, really love the simplicity, the geometry, the beautiful bright colors, and the photographs of Francis Wolff. You know, Prestige and New Jazz had great album art too. It just so happens that they put the artists themselves on the album covers a lot less than Blue Note. But yeah, it turns out that over the years I have really focused quite intensely on Blue Note as a label. Really kind of by way of Rudy Van Gelder and wanting to focus on Rudy Van Gelder. In fact, when I started Deep Groove Mono, my first idea for a website name was 767 Lexington Ave. And I was trying to get that domain name at first, and it was actually taken by the actual building property management in New York City. So that's one of the reasons why I went with Deep Groove Mono. The other reason I went with Deep Groove Mono, I was thinking, well, I can focus mostly on Blue Note, but then I can also cover other albums. Like, I really like the Clifford Brown and Max Roach stuff on MRC or something like that, and I can still cover that and it will still make sense within the brand of Deep Groove Mono, you know? So that was a big reason why I went in that direction, but my intention all along was to focus mostly on Blue Note. Sometimes I wonder what other collectors think of what they might see as my obsession with Blue Note. There was one time where I found a video on YouTube of a group of record collectors I'm not going to name talking about collecting, and my name came up. They mostly had very nice positive things to say, but one collector said something a little off color that made me think. I didn't quite understand what their criticism was, but it made me think that maybe they were saying that they felt like my collecting interest and taste was kind of boring, or that it was very singular. That stuck with me, whether that's what they meant or not. I really thought about that a lot. In my defense, I would say that I love a lot of different jazz records on different labels, but it just turns out that the majority of the vintage jazz records I collect are Blue Note. I mean, even if you take the collecting and the vinyl element out of it, the vast majority of my favorite jazz records are Blue Note. Yeah, Blue Note, it just really does it for me. It's the complete package from the musicians to the production to the engineering to the album art to the vinyl manufacturing. All that stuff, I feel like it checks all the boxes. In the last couple months, I've kind of geared back up with record collecting, and I'm focusing pretty much exclusively on buying Blue Note online, because I'll give the Prestige second and third pressings a chance in person, like the Trident label, Blue label stuff. But online, I just can't trust it. I can't trust that it won't have some nasty recycled vinyl hiss or something, and it's just not worth it to me. Yeah, and I mean, the other labels are in the same camp, so I mean, really buying online. Blue Note's the only label I can really trust that I'm gonna get something that's high quality as long as the record's in good condition. I guess the only other thing that I would want to talk about in this video is the controversial nature of the label. I think a lot of hardcore collectors that maybe they either have or haven't collected all the Blue Note they want, and they've moved on and now they're looking for more obscure stuff. I think a lot of them, especially from like a pure rarity standpoint in terms of like just how many of the records are out there, yeah, I think it's probably something where it's not as rare as other stuff that has the same value, just because there's so much more of a demand for it. My wife is kind of anti-Blue Note. You know, she's a jazz fan, but like she very rarely buys a Blue Note record. She's always had kind of this countercultural personality ever since I met her. And she's always kind of like shies away from popular stuff. She's really into fashion, and she avoids the popular brands, like name brand stuff. And once she started collecting jazz records, she kind of knew right away she didn't want to collect Blue Note. And I think for her, a big reason why she didn't want to was because of the price. She didn't need to collect originals. She was buying a lot of reissues, and even the reissues in Japan, she knew that the Blue Note reissues were a lot more expensive than the reissues from other labels. So that was a turnoff to her, and I totally get that. Sometimes, you know, I'll be playing Blue Note after Blue Note after Blue Note, and my wife will have to say, "Can we listen to something that's not a Blue Note album?" That might be the part of me that like is maybe mildly borderline on the spectrum, where, you know, I get really intensely focused on something and I never grow tired of it. And it's been hard for me to reconcile my intense focus and passion for Blue Note, knowing that there is this stigma amongst jazz collectors towards it. So, you know, I've had to accept that, you know, there's probably going to be people out there that maybe frown upon me or look down on me or think I'm shallow or, you know, I don't have expansive interest or interesting taste as a collector because I'm so focused on Blue Note. And I've just had to persevere through it. So yeah, I mean, I think Blue Note remains a controversial record label to experienced jazz collectors. I think that it carries that stigma amongst them that it's overrated, the vintage pressings are overvalued, collectors focus too much on Blue Note in their content on the internet, in their listening, whatever. But I'm here to say that my taste is my taste, and I've been pretty committed to collecting Blue Note jazz records and learning their catalog for a good 12 years now, and I really don't see that changing. Full disclosure. Also, it amazes me that, you know, year after year, there's more to explore on the label. I mean, the fact that they recorded so many great classic jazz albums in the hundreds is amazing. I wouldn't expect any jazz collector to focus only on Blue Note and only collect and listen to Blue Note records, but the point stands that it feels like there will always be something new to discover with the label in terms of albums that I haven't heard before or I really haven't paid very close attention to. All right, well, I think that's it for my diatribe on Blue Note Records, my favorite jazz label, I am very proud to say. And yeah, stay tuned for the next Record Collector Confessions. I will see you next time.